All right, Joanna, I am so excited to talk to you again. Just to introduce this conversation to my channel, your PeriGodmother, I met Dr. Johanna Murphy at the gym in a strength training session, and just so happened that we both work with women in perimenopause and menopause, and we just hit it off. And we had a conversation last week. It was so, just inspiring to speak with someone who comes from a different discipline, but we somehow are landing in a very similar moment. And so I would love to get to know you a little bit more and have our audience get to hear what you're about, just see where in our work we overlap and our different perspectives and things like that, and just to have a fun conversation. So um, yeah, welcome, Johanna Murphy. Dr. Johanna Murphy, can you go ahead and introduce yourself? Talk a little bit about your practice and your work and your vision.
Yeah. Thank you for having me here. It feels so great to be collaborating and to be thinking about how to put these conversations that we've been having out into the world. So, like Vika said, I'm a psychologist. I've been practicing in the Bay Area for over 20 years in private practice. And I would say my expertise is in working with women in times of big transition. So I've worked with a lot of college students here at UC Berkeley, and I've worked with a lot of moms, pregnant and postpartum. And now I'm really building an arm of my business in perimenopause and menopause, and just enjoying working with this time of like radical change, transition, how to work with these moments that can feel really scary, how to work with them in a way where we feel possibility and where
Mhm.
we feel empowered and we feel that things are expanding rather than collapsing. Because I
Mhm.
think when we're in fear, which we often are in times of big transition, we get scared and we kind of pull in. And that, of
Right.
course, affects our mental health. And so that is my aim, to help women in this time when there's more attention on how perimenopause affects us, to help women understand more of the mental health issues in this time.
Yeah, and I have noticed in my groups because I do workshops with women in perimenopause and early in the menopause transition, and I'm teaching about nutrition and lifestyle, and I have a doctor coming in talking about hormone therapy. But what often comes up is issue. There are a lot of issues around mental health, and I have noticed for myself and for many of my private clients and my students that the mental health piece and the symptoms are very much overlapping. And it just seems like a conversation that's not really, we're just not talking about it enough. And I know for myself, when I was in early perimenopause and I started having really intense symptoms of premenstrual dysphoric disorder, which is like PMS on steroids for anyone who doesn't know what that is. I went to my doctor, my gynecologist, and she gave me one of, a choice of two options: oral birth control pills or antidepressants. And at that time, neither of which I was concerned personally for the side effects from both of those medications, for reasons of genetics and predispositions in my family, but that was all they had to offer me. And I think things might be changing, but no one suggested other ways of protecting my mental health and helping me with symptoms and how those can overlap, endocrinology and psychology and all those things, and the nervous system. No one even brought up anything about the nervous system. So I'd love to hear a little bit more from you about this gap and what you've noticed and
Mm.
how you help fill that gap.
Yeah, it's such a good point. And as you were talking, I was thinking about some of why there are these key times in women's life that I've really been able to be helpful. And I think in times of transition, it is true that for women in particular, we expect this kind of like, just rise to the challenge. You can do it. Pull yourself up by the bootstraps. I mean, for men too, but I'm thinking specifically with like pregnancy and postpartum. Now there's more awareness of like postpartum depression being real,
Hmm.
or even, this PMS, PMDD, like you're talking about being real. I think we're just starting to understand that more clearly about perimenopause and menopause, that
Hmm.
there's been this kind of like, oh, you can be okay if you take the hormones or exercise more or even take meds. I think what happened to you often happens without, going to the gynecologist. Here's birth control pills, here's uh, an SSRI. Usually those are like Prozac, um, these kinds of drugs. And, without saying, but if you do an SSRI, if you want to do a low dose of an SSRI, maybe you should also be in therapy because
Hmm.
you want somebody helping you assess whether that's helping, and
Right.
honestly, more importantly, how you're doing, like
Right.
how you're taking care of yourself. So it just kind of gets back to this unfortunate lack of support for women's health we've seen for a very long time. And I see it
Right.
for young women too. It's not just an aging thing like, oh, you're invisible now, so you don't get the help you need. I see it for young women who are so anxious and so overwhelmed and really don't feel okay to say, I'm struggling. Even if I'm
Hmm.
young and I've gone to college, I don't know how to enter the world
Right.
at this phase. So
Right.
I just think that's something like more awareness about mental health and how it affects women in particular is
Yeah.
something I've always advocated for. And I think there needs to be more awareness about it.
Yeah. And as our hormones are fluctuating, they fluctuate wildly in puberty. And so as girls are coming into their reproductive years, they're also going through these roller coaster rides and their brain is changing and they're having all these symptoms. And then perimenopause, it's like you're on the other side and you're going up and down, but nobody really talks about that and the impact that that might have on mental health. So we see a lot of women in, falling into depression or having unmanageable anxiety episodes and thinking, why, what's wrong with me? I'm doing everything I've always done. My life
Right.
maybe hasn't changed that much. And so it's like so insidious and gradual that sometimes you don't even see it happening, but it's happening. And I think if it were being talked about and out in the open more, and especially if women could talk to each other about it and realize they're not alone and they're not imagining it. And it's not, they're not broken. They're just, their bodies are adjusting and their brain is affected. This is an opportunity, these transitions for stepping into a new phase. I like to think it's like we get to maybe the veil gets thin when we get into perimenopause and we just can't take shit anymore. Things that we used to be able to tolerate, somebody like a grumpy teen or, somebody disrespecting us at work, suddenly it doesn't really fly. And maybe that's not a bad thing. Maybe it's time for new conversations and boundaries and like a new sense of respect for ourselves.
Yeah, I really agree. Two things that I talk about that you're bringing up are that perimenopause and menopause can feel like a second adolescence
Mm-hmm.
because the reproductive hormones are waning. And
Mm-hmm.
that waning of reproductive hormones can be so destabilizing because all our adult life, pretty much, we've had periods and we've known this monthly cycle. And then that starts to change and it's very disorienting. It's very hard to not feel like yourself, like you're saying. And I do feel like it's low tide,
Yeah.
like you're saying, that like there's more of the cracks are showing, more of the rocks, barnacles, all of that. But we don't stay in low tide. I think the
Mhm.
hard part is the rhythm becomes different. We don't have a monthly cycle where we're like, oh, right, I just have PMS. I've
Mhm.
noticed for a lot of women, it's like, whoa, really hard right in that first phase of perimenopause. Then
Mhm.
maybe you're okay for a year or
Yeah.
two or three, and then you're in menopause and you're like, whoa, now I'm having all these physical symptoms, or now
Yeah.
I'm having all these emotional symptoms,
Mhm.
or the spirit symptoms, the existential symptoms, that are more like a classic man's midlife crisis. But as
Mhm.
women, we're more professional. We have the same room, maybe to fall apart like men classically have. So I think it's very disorienting, is the
Yeah.
main thing I'm trying to say. And I think if we do go in more towards like, how am I doing? How can I take care of myself emotionally
Yeah.
in this time? It can be like a real uh crossroads where you do learn to take better care of yourself. You have less of that estrogen, first of
Yeah.
all, so you are prone to feel less relational. That's another thing I talk about where it's like you just don't want to cook and clean and caretake quite as much.
Right.
So how do you um, recognize that, take care of yourself, make shifts so things work better in this time? And I like helping women a lot individually and in groups with these issues.
Yeah. And the oxytocin is waning too, that protective um, molecule that helps us, sort of be in that loving, accepting, caretaking mode. That is waning, and we have to figure out other ways to keep that going. And there are many ways, even if our kids aren't cuddling with us anymore, we don't have kids, there's pets and there's things we can do with ourselves and, just to generate more, even smiles and eye contact. And so, um, I also noticed, and this was my own story too, but just much lower stress resilience. And so I was kind of doing okay for a while. I had my PMDD symptoms at bay, and then I had some major stressors in my life when my parents passed away during the pandemic of COVID, and it was traumatic. And about 6 months later, all of my symptoms came back up again, like in a really big way. And I think that's another thing that sort of takes people by surprise is that it's not even if their life circumstances change that much, but their ability to roll with it is what's changing. The nervous system gets kind of agitated, and it seems to then snowball, and take some of the pre-hormone factors with it. And so instead of producing whatever estrogen, progesterone you have left, a lot of your hormone production is going towards your stress hormones. And that could be a vicious cycle. So, how do you help people when they're just having, either more stressors in their life or bigger reactions and less tolerance to their stress?
Yeah, it's such a good question. And one thing I want to just say to put it out there is that everybody reacts to this time differently. I've heard people say, like, oh, I didn't really feel it much, and my mom didn't feel it much. So, that's kind of lucky and its own thing. And then some people are like, whoa, stuff that I have had since childhood is really knocking on my door. And to me, that also makes sense with this waning of hormones that you might feel a little bit more like your girl self or more in touch with that time. I
Mm-hmm.
hear that a lot in perimenopause, like this sort of resurgence of like, um, both kind of the hard stuff from childhood, but also the positive, like some people reconnecting with hobbies like creativity. I know I really reconnected with writing and sculpting, and I needed a creative outlet. And I think
Yeah.
it's Brene Brown that talks about creativity, and if it's not released, that it turns into anger. And I do see more women in perimenopause and menopause, I think, having more irritability, more stress, and needing to find different ways to manage it. That's the
Mm-hmm.
number one thing I think I would say.
Mm-hmm.
And that, again, is destabilizing because things that worked before, like I'm a big yogi and I've always done a lot of yoga. And it's great. I love my yoga, but it's not enough now. I need other things as well. I needed hiking, and that really emerged a lot in the pandemic. And I talk a lot about that with women, like that became my release, like getting out into nature, has
Yeah.
been a huge, huge stress reducer for me. But it is really unique for
Hmm.
each person. And I
Right.
just want to kind of tie that in with like this piece of feeling more brittle, right? Feeling a
Yeah.
little more on edge, and maybe kind of welcoming that as not all a bad thing. Like if we
Hmm.
lower our expectation that we're supposed to be happy and perfect and shiny and bright all the time, other things get to come to the forefront. And that is really quite beautiful, right?
Hmm.
There's that opportunity for transformation. Like, oh, I've always wanted to have more of a creative practice. And
Hmm.
you're aging. This is the midlife crisis thing. Like, oh, I got to do it. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's
You know
now.
what? I would add in there and consistency, those expectations of consistency. What if we just let that go and like, just ride the waves as
Yeah.
they, we will need something different each day. And I also love how you brought back up like when we were younger, our creative outlets, we probably never understood it, but they were serving us. And so as we have these like childhood wounds coming up and the veil is thin and our underlying beliefs, maybe I'm not enough or I'm all alone or whatever those stories could be, if we don't also bring in the joy from childhood and the creativity and all of the things that brought us resilience as little girls. I just never thought of it that way, but I love that this is a great time to embrace that inner child and let her have some fun, whether it's out in nature or painting or sculpting or dancing, but just to play with that and bring the positive from
I
that.
really, really like to help people remember, like, yeah, like even like different phases that were hard, like parenting, with young kids, it can be so overwhelming and it's so like stressful. And I remember somebody, a homeopath, saying to me, like I was like, my daughter is sick all the time. And she's like, yeah, she's a kid. They get sick, like
Yeah.
lower your expectations. She's gonna
Yeah.
get sick. And it really always stayed with me because it was such a shock, but it was so helpful. Like, oh, right. Like that's something I have to learn to do. I have to do internally, right? I
Yeah.
have to learn to regulate, and that, especially phase with it being so stressful with little kids has carried me in this phase too, with having teenagers and being like, wow, it's really stressful. And it's like, yeah, but don't just focus on that,
Yeah.
right? And you said
Yeah.
something so beautiful a couple times about learning to ride the waves. And I do think that there is grief
Mhm.
with this transition. There's loss. And with loss, we really do need to let those waves of grief kind of come and go. And the grieving process does go better when we do that, when we allow the emotion when it's full and it like, that wave really comes over us and then it recedes. The next time it comes, it's a little less intense. And it
Yeah.
just that rhythm really then can be internalized so we feel like, oh, okay, I felt bad for a month, but I'm really feeling better now. And it's been 3 months.
Hmm. Yeah, it's interesting. Grief is often, brushed under the rug. Um, we don't have a lot of great models and tools for processing our grief in this culture. And I do think it's interesting that a lot of us are going through periods of depression and anxiety, especially when I don't know if you believe this as a therapist, but I heard this once a few years ago when I was dealing with grief, and it made so much sense that the experience of anxiety, like the anxiety isn't necessarily considered a pure emotion, but it's more like a coping
Mm,
technique to keep us from feeling the emotion that's underneath. And that
yes.
resonated a lot with me at the time because what I really needed to feel was my grief. But instead, I was feeling so much anxiety, and I was getting headaches. It was like anxiety and headaches and anxiety and headaches. And my way out of that, I started to recognize my headaches as like, oh, this is my body telling me it wants me out of my head and into my body and into my emotions, and something needs to be felt and moved down here. That I can't solve it all up here. What do you think about that?
Yeah, that's so spot on with my personal experience
Mm-hmm.
of also getting headaches. It's like such a barometer for me of like, oh, it's more like this. I'm in the red, and I've been, yeah, kind of pushing too hard. There's other variables. I don't want to minimize like physical symptoms because, like you're saying, they can really be knocking at our door as a way of like tuning in more to the body. Same
Yeah.
with the thoughts. Anyway, and I want to come back and the emotions.
Yeah.
So how do we kind of use all of those modalities to feel more like we can handle whatever's coming up, including anxiety. And that is perfect what you're talking about, because I see this a lot and really have worked with this a ton, especially with young women with anxiety. When we get into things, there's usually a real mix of emotions beneath the surface.
Yeah.
And that those are emotions that haven't been attended to. A lot of times, anger. Young women, especially, are really socialized to tamp that down, and
Yes.
I see that pop back up as depression, um, or depression is pushed down and that pops up as anxiety. Um, but the anxiety is usually a signal, like a physical symptom, that there's
Mm-hmm.
other things going on, other emotions that have been unprocessed. And a classic thing that I often tell people about is like somebody will come to me with like a fear of flying and they'll say, this fear of flying just came out of nowhere. And it takes some time. I want to be clear that like therapy is a process, and you don't usually like get like these instant results, but I see the work that is a little bit more kind of helpful is the work where you learn to look at all the pieces of the puzzle. We do that together and then really see like how do they fit together.
Mm-hmm.
So with the fear of flying, I will say, okay, so you got this fear of flying in this time. What else was going on in that time? And let's give that some attention. And once you
Mm.
start to do that, it's like, oh yeah, the fear of flying is actually my mom died then, and
Oh, interesting.
I've got to attend to that grief. And again, grief, like you're talking about, is something that we just don't deal with well in our culture. So, of course, when we're in this perimenopause phase and we're feeling the loss of some of, yeah, the resilience factors we've had,
Yeah.
even, whatever kind of benefit you've had from being a young woman, it shifts. So
There's
that's a loss.
there are a lot of losses. I mean, it's like little things that we think we probably tell ourselves, I shouldn't be upset about this. These are just little things, but they're compounding. And I think, you know, whether a woman has bared a child or not, there's it doesn't matter. You're still moving out of that phase of possibility. And
Mhm.
just that alone, like even if you never wanted to have children, or you did have children and you wanted to have more, or you did and you had enough, whatever it is, this body will not, speaking personally, will not be able to ever produce a child again. And even though I don't want it to consciously, I still think that deep in there, it's a loss of a phase of life. And we don't have any like rituals for that loss or any kind of, giving it its due attention. And
That's what I would say, Vika. I would really say giving it its due attention. Like that's
Mhm.
what I facilitate is more space to understand how things have affected you. As you
Mhm.
were talking about that, I was thinking about how in that perimenopause phase, I really thought I kept thinking I was pregnant. And I kept doing pregnancy tests. Like I was not pregnant. My hormones were shifting for
Right,
sure.
right.
And then what emerged was like instead of the high school dream where you haven't been in class all semester and you have to take the final and you're like,
Yeah,
scared. I
can't
had
find the room.
exactly. I was having the dream of like I didn't have kids and it was too late. And I
Mm,
had all this kind of emotion in the dreams and probably unprocessed grief myself.
mhm.
Um, and I was so startled by how stark the dreams were, where it would be like this whole scenario. And then I would be like, oh my gosh, I didn't have didn't have kids. And
Yeah,
it would be really startling, you
yeah,
know?
yeah.
And so I think you're right. There's a lot of grief in this time.
Mhm.
And grief is hard and overwhelming. And you're right, we don't have a lot of like traditions around it, but I've had a lot of grief in my life and it's such a powerful teacher. It makes life richer. I really
Yeah,
do believe that. You see life differently when you've lost people. You know how to, maybe you have better discernment, which I also talk about a lot in perimenopause and menopause treatment because that's what we have. We have our kid self that
mhm.
comes back with some of the joy and some of the hard stuff, but now we have some wisdom.
Yeah,
We have this ability to be discerning and be like, yeah, but maybe what I really need is to go dance and have some fun again.
yeah,
And maybe I don't need this work as much anymore. And as destabilizing as that is, it can also be really relieving.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's all of it, right? And I think the more that we can actually be with the grief and have compassion for ourselves when we are kind of in the lows of it, the more we can appreciate the other side, the freedom that can come from this stage of life, the freedom from the hormonal soup that and the reproductive hormones that have kept us in a certain state and kept us in these monthly up and downs. For me, especially with PMDD, it's an incredible freedom to not have to go through the intensity of the monthly cycles. And
Mhm.
so now it gives me a new opportunity I have a new kind of energy available. Not that I don't have other kinds of cycles to go through, but it's sort of an optimistic, like, ooh, what do I get to do in this second act of life?
Right. I love that. Like there's these new possibilities is what I hear you saying.
Yeah,
And that's so lovely because instead of feeling like it's the end, right, of our life, not. We're gonna live. Most of us, I mean, we none of us know, but that's the other thing. There's an opportunity in this time to start processing. I will die, right? That is gonna happen.
yeah,
And so what do I want for my life now?
yeah,
And where do I what are my priorities? Where do I want to put my energy? And friends, right? Like who do I want to hang out with? Who don't I want to hang out with?
yes. It's a
Relation,
great time.
yeah,
Relationships.
a lot. That's a whole subject we could talk about. Maybe next time we'll
Yes.
talk more about relationships.
Yeah, but it's a great time to, sort of take inventory of what matters. What are your values? Who are your forever people? I mean, we talked about this in our workshop, that the five regrets of the dying, and it's usually not I wish I worked harder or I wish I made more money. It's often about relationships. I wish I invested more in my friendships. I wish I spent more time, letting myself be happy and taking risks and things like that. And so it's a great time. Perimenopause is a perfect time to reassess and think about what direction you want to start heading on, and to prepare yourself. Maybe you need a career change. Maybe you need some friendship changes. Maybe you need to grow some friendship groups. We're still recovering from the pandemic,
Mm.
2025, and the social, like the repercussions of our jacked up nervous system, being afraid of other people walking down the street. I've finished the book about polyvagal world, Seth and Stephen Porges. I hope I'm saying his name right. But just that they were saying that going through the pandemic and seeing people in the street with a mask, without a mask, but having this feeling that this person is dangerous and can endanger my life and my loved ones, it the nervous system hasn't necessarily recovered from that. And so it's no surprise that we're in such a divided, fear-based world right now. They say this is the aftermath of four
Agree.
years. Yeah.
Really agree with that. And I remember talking to another psychologist friend, right, kind of 3 months into the pandemic, and she's like, this is going to last for many, many years. And I was
Mm.
like, oh my gosh, you're right. Because it's a
Yeah.
level of grief, a level of loss that we, in our generation, haven't really experienced. People have gone through major world wars, World War II, they experienced that kind of loss.
Yeah.
But there's something, you're right about seeing people in masks. And even still, I go to the market and, in the Bay Area, people are masking up and there's another wave of flus going around. And it still does that thing to me,
Right.
that nervous system jangle
Yeah.
that is so intense. And to have our like community, our day-to-day interactions with people medicalized, I
Yeah.
think is a really big deal. And we won't fully understand the effects of that for a while.
Yeah. And it definitely, the effects of the fear and the stress associated with that definitely exacerbates our symptoms. I mean, I just went through a couple months ago a very stressful period. My mother-in-law died, and all these things happened all at the same time. I got sick for like three. It was just a cold. It wasn't COVID or the flu, but it took me a long time to shake it. It was like a good month. And a
Mm,
lot of my perimenopausal symptoms increased during that time because my body was worried about, producing stress hormones and not the other stuff. And so the nervous system is is a huge factor in our perimenopausal and menopausal symptoms. And I think that's not necessarily addressed enough either. Just
mm,
how it's such a good place to start. I mean, as a nutritionist and a health coach, I also like to start with like foundations like food and diet and sleep and exercise, that those are so foundational. But besides that, I would say the nervous system is also just as foundational, just to like start there. And so that's why one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on today is I know you have some tricks up your sleeve, and I would love to hear
mm.
more about that.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I do think you're absolutely right that the nervous system is so key to having their nervous system regulated is so key to doing well as you can do in this time. So we talked about like lowering expectations, like there just are going to be hard times, and how do we take care of ourselves in those hard times? So everybody's a little different, and this is some of why I created a mind body spirit program,
Mhm.
because I really do, some people just start getting, it's actually, one of the perimenopausal symptoms is to get a little more obsessive. And so some people can get really in their heads in this time. It's a great defense. I tell people, smart people especially, like, hey, this has worked for you for a long time to just analyze things. And I really get it. And we don't totally heal if that's where we stay, and so learning how to feel the emotions. I mean, I will say that's probably one of the main things I focus on is how can you learn to really be with some of these harder emotions, like I was talking about before, the anger, fear, sadness, um, these emotions that can just feel so strong and loud and hard, right? That's where we hear our harsh inner critic, where we're like, oh, you're so lame, you I banged my rear view mirror, my side mirror actually, and I was like, oh, why'd you do that? You can get into a whole thing, right? We can get into
Yeah.
these really negative spaces, and I really um like to talk to people about, that's more the thinking domain, but usually underneath it, there's some emotionality for me. Like, let's say it's like, I'm stressed today. Yeah. I,
Mhm.
I used to notice I would get parking tickets when I was stressed because I
Yeah,
was doing too much, right? And it was a signal. And I've learned that now when car stuff happens, okay, you're running a little too hot. You gotta slow down a little. But anyway, so I really help people with learning to be with these emotions that are more challenging so as to feel like you are more capable of holding all the emotions. And that in turn leads to feeling actually more joy. I don't know if
yeah,
you feel this, but in this time, there are moments where I'm like, I'm happier. I'm
yeah,
like lighter.
yeah,
Yes, there's these hard moments, but there's also these like really amazing, expansive, beautiful moments. And that's the spirit stuff I talk about, which is more the emotional stuff, but also more of these kind of existential, expansive states of like, why am I here? Who am I? But not just the fear around that, really
yeah,
more of the like joy and more
yeah.
of the like,
Possibility.
yeah, I'm here. I'm here to be with people, to
Mm-hmm.
interact and collaborate.
Hmm.
And that's really what's drawn me more into this work too, is I want to reach a wider audience and help people understand that this emotional work is really freeing. And people
Yeah,
are afraid of mental health. They get into this like, oh, I'm going to know something about them that they don't already know. And I'm like, no, that's not how it works. We're going to collaborate. We're going to work together to help you be more comfortable in your own skin, including your emotions. And
yeah,
then physically, for sure, like you're saying, the foundations,
yeah,
brilliant. Like we need to know that we are a physical being. We
yeah,
need, if we can eat well, sleep well, just take care of ourselves, be outside, keep looking outside like that.
yeah.
That's what feeds me, so that I can keep going.
I think also bringing women together, bringing, women together and circling or and creating community, around this topic and
Yeah.
all the things that it brings up is a really powerful lever for healing.
Mm.
Because I think what we forget about is we can get really isolated when we're not feeling right,
Yeah.
if we're tired or we have a headache or just whatever it is, we feel like our body is changing, and we might feel self-conscious and we don't like the way our clothes fit anymore, we don't like the number on the scale. I mean, all of these things can create stories in our head and keep us from doing the very thing that we probably need to do, and that's to reach out to loved ones, to reach out to people who we feel can help, we can co-regulate and create safety with and create joy and this kind of mutual support. And so that's one of the reasons why I created the Fairy Godmother circles and the workshop, is because I saw, I mean, I teach content and all that, but just getting women in the room together, whether it's virtual room or in person, it really, I mean, things really open up and you can see it on their faces. You can see people coming alive, even if they're sharing something hard, that sometimes tears come up in the room. And that's okay, because it's a relief to be able to be, vulnerable enough and to be able to connect on a deeper level.
Yeah, it's so true. Such a good point. Yeah, I think maybe a connection I would make is to that girlhood time. I really remember the transition from feeling like kind of a spunky kid to then that more early adolescent time and really getting hyper focused on friends.
Hmm.
Because you do feel kind of like I'm going through something. Are you too? And I think the
Yeah,
same is true in this perimenopause, menopause time. We're meant to be in circle in this
yeah,
time. We're meant to hear each other and offer support and really kind of hold each other through it.
yeah. Tend and befriend. That's one of the ways that women can heal, is the tend and befriend.
Yeah.
So, would you be willing? I know you talked about a method, the WOMI method. Would you be willing to share a little bit about what that is? And
Yeah. Yeah, we talked about, you and I talked about some of the WOMI method and how I'd like to do a session or a short, it'll be less than 5 minutes,
Hmm.
meditation with you.
Okay.
Um, and that is a way to show it, I think, which is
Yeah.
the best mode. But I will just say that the WOMI method is wanting out, moving in. And my idea is that we have a lot of restlessness in this time. This is pretty universal. I see where women feel more irritable, like we've talked about, disoriented, and trying to make changes. And that's the wanting out. Like, oh, I had a lot of impulse to like move or to just shift things. And some of it I knew was really maybe not so much about needing to make those external changes, but that there was, and is an internal change happening. And that's the moving in, attending to my inner world. And so it's a meditation where I guide. It's basically a body scan where we get regulated in the body, and I'll keep that part shorter. But we focus in on an area where maybe you've felt more disruption, where things have been harder. And you shared with me that emotionally, like you shared earlier in this session, that emotionally things got challenging, of course, with losing your parents and the pandemic and kids and yeah, all the hormonal shifting. So that's where I would focus a little bit more. For example, with you, I'd start with like, let's feel into more of these emotions and then understand how it affects our thinking and affects us physically. And you alluded to this earlier when you were saying that like when we have a headache or we have more of these physical symptoms, we kind of tend to retreat. And then that is its own cycle where then, it's easier to retreat and isolate than be in community. And it's not beneficial for us. That's the one thing we do know from the pandemic and all the research around how this affected us. And you also spoke to that it's really damaging. We're meant to
Yeah.
be in connection, in community.
Yeah. And sometimes we just need to ask for help from
Yeah,
others and
yeah,
not just go it alone. And yeah.
that's right. That's right. Yeah, no,
So wanting out, moving in. So wanting out is referring to wanting out of the experience of what is
yes.
that desire to not and and the redirection is actually move in and connect with what is.
Yes, thank you for reflecting that and reframing that because that really just came to me so clearly that it
Yeah.
is, that saying it's an inside job in this time in particular. I'm
Yes.
not saying you can't make changes, but just slow down with that impulse because it may be more of this internal work that actually ends up being more beneficial, right?
Yeah.
Like, well, for sure, we know that if we get our nervous system regulated, and you were asking about that as well, if we get our nervous system regulated, everything's going to go better. We're going to be clearer in our thinking. We're going to be able to be with our emotions better. We're going to
Yeah.
sleep better. All of these things, eat better.
Yeah.
So, there's lots out there around regulating our nervous system. I believe very much in a mind-body approach.
Mhm.
And so if you do have physical outlets that really help you go towards those, I definitely think wellness, nutrition can make such a huge difference, especially in this time. So this work you're doing is so valuable. I see some women just like, it's just a game changer. Like, oh, I've never really been able to focus on food in this more empowered way, like you offer support around. And then just kind of doing that as a self-care um, effort or really putting energy in there can just shift things so beautifully. So I
Yeah.
wanted to say that for the physical stuff.
Yeah.
So if you're
Thank
open to
you.
it, I'll
Yeah.
I'll guide you through it.
Yeah. We'll just do like a short mini session, like a few minutes.
Okay, that sounds great. That sounds
Okay.
great. Yeah. So I'm going to have you close your eyes and I'm going to have you just tune in to your breathing, your body. maybe put a hand, your right hand on your chest and your left hand on your belly as a way of just feeling into the body. So I like to have you start with feeling into the low back and pull your energy in and back at the low back. And this is just a signal that you're going to attend to your physical experience. You're noticing what's going on with your body in time and space right now. From here, I'd like you to travel up to the area at the back of the heart and notice how your emotions are percolating, where they're at, and that they're there, that you can tune in here. And then the same for the back of the head. See if you can pull your energy in and back at the back of the head. And notice how this just kind of relaxes the face, the forehead, the ears, the jaw, the eyes. And from this place, we can go back to the heart center and feel into the emotions here. If you notice anything really knocking at your door, you can let us know. Is there anything here you're aware of that you want to share?
I mean, literally, my husband just walked in and my dog, her tail is wagging so hard on the, I don't even know if you can hear that, but she's trying to stay relaxed, but she's so excited to hear him walk in. And so there's like a knocking with her tail. So that's why, um,
Hmm. What does that bring up for you? Because that's such the perfect thing we feel for sure as moms and as women, like, oh, I've got to attend to this now. I've got to shift and deal with the dog.
yeah, I mean, I think what it brings up for me is that when someone enters the space, because I work from home, and so when I hear a door open and someone's coming in, my whole nervous system shifts. And it's almost like I leave my body and go right to my head. I think about time. I think about dinner. I think about, you know, who's got to be driven where. And
Mm,
so,
mm. Great, Vika.
yeah, it's kind of perfect that that happened right in the middle of this.
Yeah. So just stay with your experience because this is how the field can shift. Really, this is one of the things that I teach is staying. It's okay. The dog can bark, the dog will be okay. And you're going to stay with your experience of pulling your energy in and back at the head. Yep, the thoughts are there, but you're not the thoughts. The emotions are there, coming back to that press of like, oh, I got to do something. Maybe it's some anticipation. Yep, that's there. And I'm still going to stay in my experience. And physically, where do I feel this? Does my stomach get tight? Do my legs start to get tight? Let that all go for one moment. We're going to wrap this up. And you're going to go towards the rest of your day with some awareness of the back of the body, where you get to check in with you and what's true for you, with this awareness of how the thoughts, the emotions, the physical sensations affect us. And when we start to be aware of one area, like emotions being challenging, and being with that, it allows some ease in the other areas. So that's the main idea I want to offer here with this is that
Mm,
this is wanting out, but moving in, literally.
yeah.
You're
Yeah.
staying with you while dealing with the demands of life and maybe letting those demands feel a little different. Maybe you're interacting with those demands just from a little bit of a different place, and this creates some ease.
Oh, I love it. I really did experience like it was an opportunity for me to really witness what is happening all day long to my nervous system with like I would otherwise just be go right to the external world to, 20 feet in front of me, the door, and completely leave that deep, that back space.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I love that you gave me like a location to kind of sit in and yeah.
Yeah, that's what I find. I find that especially as women, we're so like, oh, how can I
Hmm.
help? What do I do? Yeah, I'm so pulled too. It's like, yeah, but if the more we start learning to pull in and back like that, the more we can be like, oh, the thoughts are overwhelming me. Let me pull in and back. Oh, you know,
Yeah.
the emotions are overwhelming me. Let me feel them, but I'm not my emotions or thoughts. And physically also. Then if we start to learn like where do we hold all this stuff physically, then we also have some release. So
Yeah.
I will let you go, but it's so lovely to,
Thank you. This has been such a great conversation, another great conversation with Johanna. And so if people want to learn more about you, where would you direct them?
yeah. So I have a website, which is
Mhm.
women in mind, all one word.net. So you
Okay.
can check out my website
Hmm.
at womeninmind.net. And my name is Johanna Murphy. It's up here on the screen. My email is Johanna Murphy, dr.johannamurphy@gmail. So that's another way you could always reach out. But
Great.
hopefully we're just going to keep going with our conversations
Yes,
and you'll hear more that way as well.
I love that. All right, Johanna. Well, thank you so much. It's been
Thank-
great.
Just a pleasure. Thank you. Take care.
All right. Bye.
Bye.